Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Try and get you a bit more interactive. Let's go. I've got loads of stuff to talk about, and I hope none of it's contentious, but I hope some of it is, if that makes any sense. This is about how we got into this place in the first place, what we then did with Surrey, some of the things that we've tried to do, and some of the things we're going to do next, and some of the technologies we use. So we're going to go in a bunch of different directions, and I'd encourage you to ask me questions. If the question is going to come up in a slide, I'll say that's coming. If it's not going to come up, I might hold it till the end. If it's really interesting, we might go off on a tangent. It's kind of fun. So I start with the assertion, location-based mobile apps with open social data are the face of policing on the internet. Do you believe me? Nobody believes me. No shows of hands. All right, I've got a tough job then. Why should people care in the police about social media? Well, they should care because everyone's doing it, and I think Gavin's talked about this. So in some of these cases where you've said something, Gavin, I'll reference it back, and then we'll skip on. Why mobile then? Because mobile apps are where the internet is now, I think. This is a guy called Martin Beebe. He works for Microsoft. He works on Windows Phone, but I don't think that's terribly relevant. What's relevant is what he tweeted. Page impressions on the official Rugby World Cup mobile app outnumber rugbyworldcup.com by 3-1. That's interesting. More people use their phone to access a sports information page about the Rugby World Cup than use the internet using a browser on a desktop computer or even a browser generically. That's interesting. The mobile app has really become the way that you interact with these kinds of services, news items, feeds, pieces of information on the web. What I'm going to talk about a bit is how do we get to here? How do we get to the place where mobile apps with the internet and everyone uses mobile apps to communicate? What we did to approach the market, some detail about Surrey Police and the mobile app that we built, why we built it, what technology we used, what metrics we used to try and understand how we were going to be, whether we were going to be successful, and what we're doing next, and something about what it all means. So I hope that's interesting to you. How do we get here? Here's how I got here. You can go to this website on Twitter. I forget what it's called. It might say it on it. And you can get your Twitter birth certificate. You ever done that? I was born apparently on the 27th of January 2009. I'm pleased about that. And my godfather's BBC Newsnight. I don't know what that means. And I do watch it a lot. Maybe that's what it means. I don't know. And my age index is 51%. I don't know what it means, but I'm fascinated that I was born on Twitter on the 27th of January. The reason why I was born on Twitter on the 27th of January was because 2 weeks before that, this happened. Everyone is completely aware of this Hudson crash and how it became the kind of lightning rod for Twitter becoming a mainstream piece of technology. A friend of mine had said to me just before this, you've got to try Twitter out. You've really got to try it. Just try it for 2 weeks and see what happens. I didn't really buy it. And then he rang me and said, are you watching this on Twitter? And I said, no. Watching what? He said, well, look. And he sent me a link. I clicked on the link and I saw Janice's picture, famous picture. And it was really at that moment that I realized to myself that this stuff was actually way more important than I had previously imagined. Previously, I was kind of, well, this is a fad. It's just the latest hula hoop. It's a new version of the rattle, to use your analogy, Gavin. But actually, it's not. What I really want to see from this picture, from this person, is the opposite view. Why is this important? It's important because this is happening now. That person is there. They're on the boat. Therefore, this message is authentic, it's timely, and it's actionable. She's on a ferry. I'd love to see the other side, how many ferries are coming towards this thing. And there's no doubt that the instant nature of this picture on social networks is what made this a successful outcome as much as the guy who landed the plane so spectacularly well. The other thing that happened around this time, or just before it, was the G20 in London. You probably remember this. What's interesting about this picture? Anyone? Lots of policemen. Lots of members of the public too. Member of the public standing there on his phone. Police officers aren't. Police officers are doing stuff. In the responses to this that the House of Commons Select Committee heard, first of all, they heard from Sir Paul Stevenson, who you mentioned, Gavin, that the police should be aware that their behaviour will be monitored, recorded, and instantly made public via the internet. And at that time, if you remember back, it's not that long ago, people were saying, well, that's ridiculous. This mustn't be allowed. People must send it to the court first. But of course, that's not the way the world works. And also, if you read the Select Committee report, it will tell you that there was a conflict of objectives between the protesters and the police, that the police service, in this case the Met, had an inadequate capability to respond to new demands. Communication was insufficiently consistent across police officers. It didn't meet the objective of policing by consent. And training was required on the issue of the democratic right for all concerned to be able to protest. And that training was required by the public, the media, and the police themselves. So that's kind of interesting. And this is all that background. Yanis Crumbs, playing in the Hudson. I'm born on Twitter because I've decided Twitter's interesting. G20. So we focused on changing the nature of my business, Multizone. I wanted to build my own software company. I've been building software, as I've just ran into an old colleague from years ago up in the crowd, Mark Terry. I've been building software for years, mobile phone software for software companies, major ones. And I wanted to build software for myself. What software shall I build? I thought to myself in 2009. Well, there must be a place in the market with a need to engage in this new way with these new tools, which has no tools now and is ready to try. Simple, right? Not really. Here was my initial pitch, my kind of presentation deck from the time. This is not just the main points of it. Everything's real time now. Social media is a disruptive technology. I love disruptive technologies. Websites were a novelty when they came out, so don't think this is a novelty. You need effective tools for engagement, and if you engage well, you can reduce cost. And you can reduce costs in areas like service improvement, monitoring, customer service, reputation management, and policy reinforcement. And then I had a bunch of examples of how people were doing that with early social media tools. Then I went on to say how a mobile phone app could help. It could help with cost reduction. It could help with diverting people to lower cost or self-help systems or solutions. It could provide a positive response. It could be innovative. It could provide governance. And it could be an enabler of a culture shift in an organization. And we talk a lot about social culture and the way that people use social networks. But in this sector, in the policing sector in particular, there's an issue about governance and about control and finding a balance between these two things. You know, social is all about openness and self-regulating and everybody can do it and say what you like. That doesn't really work in the police. It doesn't really work in lots of hierarchical organizations. It works in software companies and collaboration companies and these kinds of things. In organizations with hierarchy, you need to understand the need for responses, policy, moderation, and in some cases censorship. Why do you need to understand that? Because if you don't, this happens. This is one of my slides from early 2009. I posed the question, how does social media affect policing? And the answer is it does already. And I use this poor unfortunate person, Rob Ward, who put on his Facebook, I can't wait to bash up some long-haired hippies at the G20. And didn't understand at the time that would mean that was on the front page of the Sun the following day. Now, what happened? Probably the right thing, actually. It's proportionate. He got a written warning under the public conduct regulations for saying something stupid. As I've used this slide a lot with the police, and a lot with senior police officers, and senior police officers are often at pains to tell me that the police have always been saying stupid things to people, and now they're just able to do it in a way where everyone can see it. So my point behind the slide is that social media affects policing already, so we better figure out a way to deal with it. I started to look at the market too now and try to understand how we would go about going to market. This is a simplification of my market segmentation. You've got the public sector, the blue light services, and the government. And in the government piece of the segment, you've got local authorities, unitary authorities, and what have you. In the blue light, you've got police, fire, and other blue light services. What I found initially was encouragement, little or no budget, lots and lots and lots of vested interests. I'm a really small company. I haven't got the time or the ability to deal with that. The complexity of the market for a small business is horrifying and really, really difficult. And actually, and worryingly really, at this time, an ongoing distaste for social media, depending on who you talk to. It presents some real issues, actually, which I think are ongoing for UK PLC, not Surrey Police, by the way. I'll come on to how brilliant that's been as an experience in a minute. But this is what happened to me in 2009. I thought it'd be interesting if you're a small business in digital. These are things you've got to look out for. Sorry about the amount of text on the slide. But all right, nothing happened for months before and after the general election. Nothing. Couldn't get anyone to talk to me. Couldn't get any meetings with anyone. Couldn't get any traction. Couldn't get any budget out of anyone. No, we're not doing anything yet. Well, what do? Someone's paying your salary. Can't we do something? No, come back in 6 months. I'll be bankrupt in 6 months. Typical conversation. The structures, the leadership and the guidance in the public sector actually leave the potential there for there to be very disparate and fragmented projects across England and Wales and Scotland. So just because you're working in Surrey doesn't mean that anyone from another geographic area will give a damn. And in fact, in some cases, with elements of the public sector, both in the blue light and in local authorities, if you're working in one sector, in one geographic area, another geographic area won't work with you. I had one of the Midlands forces saying, well, if they're doing it, we're not doing it. You're not doing social media because another police force is like saying we're not going to use cars. There's also an unwillingness in a lot of cases to work with small businesses, even to reply to email. I'm used to getting replies to email. It really bothers me when you get nothing and you phone up and say, hello, I emailed you the other day. Oh, yes, what was it about? And it drives me bananas. But it's a public sector malaise that I wasn't used to coming from the private sector. Inability to do a contract, inability to communicate, stands for themselves. A mentality about controlling the message I came across a lot in local authorities and in police and fire services. We don't believe that you can talk about this stuff without controlling the message, they would say to me. But people are talking about it already, I would say, on Twitter and on Facebook. How do you expect to control the message if someone has said, there is a fire on Twitter? Answer, they shouldn't do that. Okay, good. Not much of a point in having much more of a conversation. Some police forces and I think large organizations in general have turf wars across different departments too. So depending on where you got to, that was the level of the conversation you could have. If you started with IT, it would inevitably resolve to, well, we're not buying those phones. If you started with comms and marketing, it would inevitably resolve to, well, we can't control the message, so we're not interested. We're doing press release publishing and PDFs, which we distribute to people. And if you talk to operations, it was, well, we don't have budget, we're doing something else. We've got another project, you need to go and figure that out first. Some police forces and some local authorities also just warned us off. We would go and try and get meetings. We would get the meeting generally. And then we'd be told, well, we can't talk to you about your product because tendering law means that if we even talk to you about it, you'll be excluded from being able to bid on it. What? Others would say, no, we're going to do this ourselves. We could do it ourselves, but we're not doing it now. Heard that. We don't have a mobile strategy. We've taken all the mobile phones away from all our staff. That's true. That's a police force in England and Wales. We have no budget. We don't understand social. It's not a priority, all these sorts of things. We also had something which I found really particularly disturbing. We agreed work with several organisations, not Surrey Police, I might add, and then nothing happened. And when we called to say, right, so you've agreed to do this, here's our detailed estimate, what's going on? Oh, no, we're not doing it now. Well, why did you agree to do it then? Stuff like that, hard work. So then, let's talk about Surrey in some more detail. Surrey was a breath of fresh air for us, actually. And it's not just the work with Surrey, it's the work with the other people that we've involved in the project, including Vodafone, played a big part in helping us. Why did we do the Surrey project? I think Gavin talked about this in depth, but if you're following social media, you'll be familiar with this virtuous circle about increased advocacy, increasing visibility. The thing that's about policing on this slide that makes it not a social media and branding slide is confidence in policing being at the bottom. But if you give the public insight, they will get more confident. If you make them confident, some of them will become advocates. And if you make some of them advocates, you will get amplification of your message out in the community. And if you get that, you will increase the visibility of what you're doing, and you get buy-in. This is why Starbucks are on Twitter, it's why Virgin are on Twitter, and it's why the police are using social networks. Surrey then. Surrey have a top-down leadership approach, open to transformation and to culture shift. I didn't get blocked by someone saying, well, I'm in comms and I can't see how this would help me get my job done, so I don't want you to talk to anyone else in my company. Instead of finding reasons not to do what we were doing, which we had come across the whole of England and Wales and Scotland, they just said to us, what could you do? And how much? It was the breath of fresh air for us. They were willing to take a risk with a local company. We're based in Surrey ourselves. They had a passion, as you've clearly seen, for neighbourhood policing and for social media. And then, after we kind of got started and written our proposal, said, could you just add Crime Mapper to it, which was great. We were pleased. The challenges we faced were, could we really transform service delivery within constrained budgets? Could we account for what local offices were doing? Could we bring about a culture shift in an organization with a culture and a hierarchy that was very, very set? Could we challenge expensive and outmoded devices and applications with much cheaper ones? Could we use only open data, including the crime data and all open networks? And could we avoid any data protection and security issues? Quite a big wish list, but actually quite a pragmatic one, because if we couldn't do these, then our project would not be feasible. And when we did our proposal for Gavin, it talked about, if we can do this, the feasibility of how it might be. And it was quite tentative when you read it back now, 3 years later, when it seems a bit more obvious. But it's always more obvious once you've done something than it is when you're starting. So what we agreed to do was to build a demonstrator of the technology that we could use for live deployment for the real deal in Surrey, in Runnymede, which is one of the districts in Surrey. It's about 100,000 people, which is a clue to one of the following slides. We wanted to provide something that worked for the public and something that worked for the police too, that translated really from jargon, from police speak. They have a bunch of acronyms for things, I'm sure, as we do in the tech industry. Sometimes when I meet with folks in the police, we both have to have people saying, no, what's that word? What is that word? Because I'll be saying acronyms from tech and they'll be saying acronyms from policing, and we don't understand each other. Could we do that with built-in governance? Could we make it geocoded? And could we make it live by the end of March 2011? We started this project in December. Why a demonstrator? Well, we had a huge list of things that we could potentially do, absolutely huge. And my first love is being a product manager. And to me, this is meat and drink. It's what do you do first, in what order, and how? How do you build this thing? What does it have to have? What would it be nice for it to have? What doesn't it really need? What's candy that we could leave till later? Distilling that into a release of software is what keeps me awake. So for sure, we did that. We found our feature set. I won't go through the detail of it, but the police app had to have things about contact and the police. It had to have things about the neighborhood. It had to have things about Surrey, photos of officers, pictures, helicopters, other stuff to get people interested. And it had to have live updates and news and maps. And it had to have crime data. Hard set of features, but getting to that feature set was critical. So here's the Runnymede metrics. You might have been paying attention and picked up the first two already in the talk. But there's 4, 10, 100,000, 550, and 6,050. Anyone want to guess what they are? Who doesn't know? What's the 10? Shout out. Area. It is areas, but that wasn't what I meant. So good, a point for you. That's good. 100,000 is the number of population in Runnymede. 10 is the average attendees at a local policing meeting. 550 is the number of Twitter followers of the Runnymede Police account, and 6,050 is the number of people who have downloaded our iPhone app for Runnymede. 6,050. It's only on iPhone. For me as a product manager, that's kind of interesting. And also for me as a product manager, Mark, you'll remember this, it's always good to have a slide like this with a chart that shows a big bar on the right-hand side. That's the number of downloads of our app today, 6,050, versus the number of Twitter followers. It's not an apple and an apple, really, but it's a great chart. And it shows me that there's proof that the app is more accessible than geeky Twitter and social networks. People will download apps to look at the bus times, the tube map. They won't necessarily want to sign up for Facebook or Twitter or Flickr. They won't even know what those things are. Those are jargon words for pictures, news, and updates. So apps are more accessible than social networks themselves. And that was a key thing we identified really early on. And actually, if you look at the market, iPhone is between 20 and 30% of the addressable market of smartphones, depending on how you measure the market and whose stats you read. So the fact that this is only on iPhone, because it was a demonstrator, remember, means that we're only addressing 20% or 30% of the market. So if we were on all the platforms that smartphones were on with this app for Surrey, then we should have 3 times this number of downloads, which makes the figures even more interesting. And we'll find that out shortly. What made our project successful was a number of things. I'll just quickly go through them. We had executive management support from Gavin and from Mark Rowley, who was the chief constable. Mark Rowley said, this is a two-way flow, and it's more dynamic than anything we have had before, and really supported this initiative, as did the whole of the executive management team in Surrey Police. Without that, we would have failed. We have failed in other police forces in the UK because we can't get that level of support. We also did some level setting and some buy-in. I told you we brought about a culture shift, and we did. We did an impact review, really, to try to understand what this technology would do. And this is us holding a workshop with the senior managers across all the different departments. Remember I said IT, ops, communications, and operational policing? We had representatives from all those teams in this workshop, and we went through making sure everyone understood what this technology was, because everyone will tell you they know what it is, but they don't necessarily know in the detail. And if someone doesn't know the detail, they'll be negative about it. They won't support your project. So for me, it was about making sure I had the buy-in of the team sufficient to be successful. So we made the workshop about building an action plan that everyone signed up to for making this project successful, and it was. In fact, fascinatingly, some of the people who came to that workshop hadn't met each other before that day, and yet they work for the same organization, which is a pretty amazing thing. We think we have a good insight into policing and social engagement too. It's not just about social media, it's about the way you build the app, and it's about understanding the issues facing officers who are out in the front line and the people who are responsible for tasking them, giving them the work to do that they go about. We got some support from Vodafone. Vodafone helped us with some devices to pilot test the applications in Runnymede. It would have taken me potentially more time than my company had runway to live with revenue to get police devices approved to use our software, to go through the security. And that's not a criticism, it's just the way it is. And it's something that we'll get to eventually. But I couldn't afford to have that slow us down in terms of delivering this project. So fortunately, I was able to convince Vodafone with Gavin's help. We went down to Newbury. I think they were very impressed because he wore his uniform and everything. That definitely made a big impact on them. And then I met, on one bank holiday weekend, I met one of the chief technology folks from Vodafone in a car park in Slough, where we got boxes of mobile phones out of the boot of his car and put them into the boot of my car. And I said to him, have you seen that Bob De Niro film, Heat? Where they're all around. If anyone's watching us, we're going to be arrested any second now, because it looks like we're doing something bad, Vodafone obviously had an idea that this was going to be important to them, and now I'm pleased to say they're supplying 500 new HTC Android-based devices for Gavin's officers. So their help was actually instrumental, but it's paid them back, and it's an indirect payback because they had no idea we were going to be successful. They took a bit of a leap. We also did a great launch. I did PR and press for the tech industry, and Gavin and his team did PR and press for the policing audience. And somehow that fused into getting us just the most incredible amount of visibility. We were on national TV. We were in all the newspapers, the major nationals, all the local papers. I even got a cutting from the Belfast Times. I don't know why we were in there, but we were. And I was on Radio 4 with Gavin. We were on Inside Westminster. I've never been on Radio 4 before. That was very exciting. After that public release, we determined that it would be a good idea to roll the software out to the other 10 boroughs and districts in Surrey. And that involves, obviously, we built a demonstrator for Runnymede. That involves new functionality in the software and better capability. And it involves field training for Gavin's officers who are going to be using this technology. Some of whom are very wary of social media. They don't want to get into trouble. The last thing they want to do is be disciplined for inappropriate use of a technology because it's too difficult. And so there's lots of stuff that we've got to do to reassure and make it clear to officers that actually there's a benefit to their job in doing this stuff and that they can get stuff out of it, and it's good for them, for their career and for their performance review and for the task that they've got of engaging with the public according to the neighborhood principles that Gavin talked about earlier. What we're doing next is that rollout. We're going to be partnering with a mobile network operator. I can't say who, but you can take a wild guess. We're building a free application for Gavin for his tasking officers and staff. That's an announcement to today that I don't think Gavin necessarily knew about, but it's a present. We need to do this for lots of reasons. The tasking folks need to be connected to the rest of our system, and we want to be able to be sure that we can connect the dots between tasking and frontline, which wasn't really part of our pilot and our demonstrator. It was really focused on the mobile devices. And we start work with our next police force customer next month in February. So we're... Thank you. How do we do this? Let me go through this quite quickly. We knew we needed to build a mobile experience with the right technology. It's all very well having that big list of features, but you can do all that on a website. A mobile phone's different to a web application because the mobile phone is mobile, it's got location-based services in it, it's built for social sharing, and it's built for using data from the internet. The process we went through was about taking those right features, understanding the performance and the other technology givens that you had to have in a mobile app, and publishing the resulting product to an app store. During the process, when we started the project, we quickly realized actually we needed 2 applications, not 1. We had to build an application for the police officers to use and an application for the public to be able to access. They couldn't be the same app. We didn't need the same functionality. Early prototypes and mock-ups, we used tools to help us understand how the user interface might work and what the experience would be. And we tested those with police officers and with the public. We built a police app. We built it around the idea of quick, error-free updates, just a normal part of people's work, but with built-in accountability and governance for Gavin and his team. We built a public app with the idea of being easy to use and all those other things. And you'll see the screens go past. It's got a nice welcome screen. It shows you where your nearest police station is, who your team are, and how to see their social feeds. This is a news feed which is live about what's going on in the part of Surrey you're in. You can plot that on a map and see what's going on where you live. And you can see where you live, what that means in terms of the crime data for the place that you live. We have to calculate that. And lastly, there's the rating and voting on priorities like selecting a rating for an iTunes. But we knew we had to build native apps. So we spent a lot of time investigating the tool chain and trying to understand how we would go about doing that across lots of different platforms. The police app that I talked about is on Android, and our public app is on iPhone. Actually, they both run in both places, but that's just how we ended up deploying them. We chose a tool chain based on a technology called Appcelerator, which you might have heard of if you're in mobile development. Up-and-coming tool, very interesting. And surprisingly for us, we were recognized by them at their conference as building one of the best apps in the government sector. The apps to the other side of us are US government apps for the transport and security and for the Library of Congress. What does all this mean? Well, there's a lot of things that are learning points in here, and I'll give you the slides afterwards if you want, and you can put them on the website for people to see. But mobile access to local information and building mobile apps for people changes everything. It's a fundamental change in the way that people want to consume this information. We can provide engagement and access to information and the opportunity for people to influence it by replying to things all the way through our app. If you see an update from an officer, you can reply saying, well, that's a bit of a waste of time. You should be over there doing that. And people do. And then they get surprised when they get a reply back from the police saying, OK, we'll do that. We're going there now. And then you get this amplification on Twitter, which is, I can't believe the police replied to me. They actually did what I was interested in. That kind of engagement really early on is something that we coined nipping in the bud. It's not a new term, but nipping things in the bud is cheaper. It's much cheaper to do that than it is to go through the intervention afterwards. One of the best examples of that is that you could end up having a freedom of information request served on you in order to disclose something that you might have been able to get just from Twitter straight away. It would have cost nothing. An FOI request would have been a committee of people and a workshop and hundreds of pounds of expense in writing letters. We also learned that you have to do this readiness stuff. You have to do level setting if you're going to bring public applications and if you're going to bring a culture shift about. I think we learned that the actual technology, the development of the mobile application itself was only a part of the project. This work around getting people together, talking to them about the technology and talking to them about how it might impact their work and how they might be able to do their work better if they use this technology was just as important as the development. I think I'm out of time, so I think at this point, Gavin, if you want to come back down, we could answer any and all questions that you might wish to ask.
We've got 10 minutes for questions.
Okay.
10 minutes, far away. I hope there is a question.
So far, Glenn, if you're in uniform, you get things for free. So.
Thanks for your talk. Just regarding the app, it seems to be that it's quite like a news channel to tell the public what you're doing as the police. I'm just curious, like in the future, will there be updates that will sort of allow people to take photos and send them to you, as well as saying where you are in a certain location? Because if you call the police, you might not know what's your address. You can then direct the police to that location. Is that something that's coming in the future versions?
I think the list of ideas we've got about what's possible with this technology is huge. What's realistic to achieve is the sort of conversations we're having now as part of the rollout. Photographs, for example, I think officers posting pictures to appeal for public information is a definite next step. So, for example, witness appeals, missing people, that sort of thing. Pictures from the public posting back in, I think for low-level community issues, yeah. For emergency response, difficult. But there is a national project that looks at what does a 999 service look like in the world of social media. So let's paint a picture. I see an incident happening, I take a photo or a short piece of video of it, I call 999. Wouldn't it be great if I could just send that down the pipe to the police control room and send it down another pipe to the officer to their mobile data terminal, and they see it when they arrive. I think we're a little way off from that, but we're certainly thinking the same thoughts.
Have you seen any misuse?
Sorry, say again?
Have you seen any misuse of the app?
Not of the app, but we see misuse of social media by police officers all the time. But you know that's Gordon Scobie is the DCC in Tayside, who's the national lead for social media and policing. And Gordon's phrase is what Angus about We trust them with a CS gas and trust them with a baton, then should be able to trust them with a Twitter account. And they know, they know that if they get it wrong, if they CS gas the wrong person, hit the wrong person with a baton, say the wrong thing on Twitter, then they're going to get disciplined. So it's no different. So we've not seen misuse of the app, but we have seen misuse of social media. Yeah. There was one at the back, and then we'll come here. Right there.
It strikes me when you talk about the app. It strikes me that you are, the police force, are going to have to take up a great deal more information from UGC on UGC, pictures from members of the public. It makes me wonder whether police officers are going to have to employ a whole lot more new skills, i.e. evidence corroborated in emergency situations, for example. Is that something that people are thinking about already? If they are, they don't. Are they embracing that?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. So our app obviously focuses on neighbourhood and community policing, and one of the other areas on Gavid's quadrant was investigation and intelligence. And a big issue there is making sense of all this information. It's the biggest issue for investigative officers is how, there's too much stuff. How do we deal with it? How do we even deal with the level of volume? And that's the challenge with that is how can you afford not to? Because people are using this technology to do this stuff. People are posting pictures of themselves holding guns as trophies. People are calling the police in the States using Twitter. That's happened. Do you call the police using 911 or do you tweet at the police? Somebody in the US who was being burgled, instead of calling the police, said to Twitter, "I think I'm being burgled, what should I do?" But if you could pick that up and be the police and say what you should do is call us or give us your phone number and we'll call you, then that perhaps is a better answer.
And that's what, just to sort of build on that, that's what, Angus had a quote there from our old chief, Mark Rowley, that's what swung Mark into this, because a colleague of ours who sits on some county level meetings, who was going to try and make it tonight actually, but couldn't, otherwise he would have told you the story himself. He was burgled and he put out a tweet after he was burgled that it had happened and what the police response had been and so on. I saw that just on a search that I had saved. I replied to him with a direct message to say, sorry to hear, anything we can do to support. Sent a message to the chief to say, you better know that this guy's been burgled because you sit on these high-level county meetings with him. That was the sort of light bulb moment for Mark that got him interested that this was something else. The operational impact of that information, we've got to deal with it now. An example I give to colleagues is that, look, when the next big atrocity happens in the UK, and it will happen, whether it be a terrorist attack or something like that, much of the primary evidence is going to get posted onto social media before it goes anywhere else. We're going to have to deal with that in the same way that we have to trawl millions of hours worth of CCTV now. So the challenge I've laid down to colleagues in Surrey is let's practice on something manageable for now. Let's practice on the Friday night incident in Woking before we have to deal with that major thing.
Yeah, and one of the key things in building this app was about getting adoption in the community, because there's no point in trying to build a community around an emergency that's happening as it's happening. You've got to build your community on your social networks that knows about and talks to the police beforehand.
There was one here.
My question's sort of related because I'm seeing the website and everyone's got an email address and is expecting a reply. It's almost get rid of the email address because there's so much work, there's so much expectation then for a response. It could be just really vague things, my cat's stuck in a tree, or my neighbour's got a horrible husband and is beating her up. How do you deal with all that sort of and filter that information?
Yeah, I mean, Andy might want to come in the front row here, but we have a particular role called a neighbourhood team coordinator that really is the link into that. So Andy.
Yeah, basically they are based on a shift basis, so they look at the incoming messages to the beat account. So for instance, the pilot area, which was at Runnymede beat, and we're covering a vast chunk of the day, but it isn't 24-hour coverage at the moment. Our whole job with the neighbourhood teams is to listen to our public from the mundane through to the serious and direct resource appropriately, whether it be the local beat officer or get them to dial 39 straight away. It's about providing the information they need in a timely fashion. And as most of you know, social media and through the education we've had from Multizone, if you're not doing it in that timely fashion, there's no point. No. There's no point.
It's
somebody
almost like take the emails off and push them onto the app. Almost.
I think that day may come eventually, but you've got to have all the different mediums for. We're sitting in this room and everybody here is engaged in this kind of thing, but there's parts of our community that aren't, and they are just starting to get grips with email, let alone social media. So we have to cater for all of them.
Is there a texting service? You know, because there are the older population that have mobile, definitely have. I mean, I think this is where mobile is more. You know, the older population have more mobiles and don't have computers sometimes.
Yeah,
some of the work we've done.
You may not know this, but you can text 999. But when you do that, the first thing it says is you have to agree to this service being able to be used. If you agree, send a message back saying I agree. You might now I'm in a fire, please help. It's meant for people with special needs.
Andrew,
The other thing we've been experimenting with, we had the Cycle Classic last year, the road race, and Box Hill, where most of the people were, the network coverage there is horrific. You don't get your mobile internet, you barely get 1 bar. So we're telling people to text, follow @CycleSurrey, which was our Twitter account for that, 286-444. Now, that's actually Twitter.
Yeah.
But the members of the public don't need to know they're using Twitter, they're just getting text updates. And we got a lot of feedback saying that was fantastic, thank you. We then got a lot of feedback, how do I turn this thing off? So we had to this is how you stop it. But we're learning from that and trying to apply that to some of the stuff we're doing as well.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing, because it can replace what would previously have been expensive proprietary SMS-based systems with free stuff provided by an American company. Fantastic.
two in the middle there. Yep.
Do you have any concern? How do you plan to handle the talk about security and open data? If you're sharing, purporting to share everything about incidents going on, and you know, as a user of the search you get into, you're happy looking at that.
Yep.
If something appears to be happening and you can't find anything about that on the news app, does that then lead to be something going on that you're not being told about? You know, do you end up sort of shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak, by not by just overlooking sharing something by sort of starting out? Do you see what?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's the privacy aspect of what you share. So on the Home Office group that I mentioned about, the information commissioners are all over that for the crime mapper data, for one thing, which is why they've got this, in my view, daft algorithm about numbers of houses that it runs down to. What that actually leads to is queries from people saying, that's not what's happening in my street. And what I say to the information commissioner is, people who live there know what's happening. So why are you sort of trying to hide it and protect them? So I just think it leads to more problems. Do we share everything? No, we don't. We're not going to advertise the fact that we've just dealt with a domestic violence incident or dealt with a sudden death. So part of the training to officers is what to share and what not to share. I guess the rule of thumb is, if it's something that's going to concern the community at large, then the basic premise would be that's what we'd want to share, because we want public involvement to try and stop it. But yeah, I agree there's a limit as to what you put out and what you don't. Gentleman in front.
Going on from what James talked about right at the beginning, there's a flip side, I guess, to the public app, which is, has there been any concern from the public about what the app could potentially be sending back to you? It could, for example, provide location-based data about where all your users of this app are, what they're up to.
Yeah, quite. I mean, and that's why you're either in for transparency or you're not. And one of the things I've talked to my sort of neighbourhood officers about the public meetings is that it's not going to be too long before they turn up at a public meeting and the people there are better informed than they are about what's going on. So they've got to be on top of their game. They've got to know their research. They've got to be using this. But I don't make any apologies to them for that. That's the way it is. So either you're in for transparency or you're not. I don't think there's a halfway house. Angus, I know you.
Well, quite a few people have read the terms and privacy statement in the app. We can tell that, and it does say we might collect stuff about you when you're using our app. We don't collect specific information, but if you reply to something in the app, then it's going to expect to use your social media credentials to do that. So for example, if you want to reply to Gavin saying, well, I think that's a stupid use of your time using this technology to do this thing, you can, but it will say from and your email address or your Twitter name or whatever. Now, of course, you can set another one up if you want to, if you really want to be anonymous, but for the most part, we've had no complaints. All I've had is emails saying, when can we have this, from people, really.
One more question, I'm told. At the back.
Yes, I know that Mark Rowley has left the chief inspector now. I wonder if the new person
In terms of Mark moving on to London, I think it'd be interesting to see what he takes with him to the sort of big world up there and their policing and protests and things. Our new Chief Constable is Lynn Owens. She starts next week. I did a briefing note for Lynn in advance of her arrival, and as part of the briefing note I sent out a tweet to say, I'm putting a briefing note together for the new Chief Constable, what would you like me to include in the note? And I got a few responses which I've put in there as a sort of light-hearted bit at the end. That's my little way of saying, take notice of this, because it's happening. And I'm sure she'll be supportive, because she's a big supporter of neighbourhood policing, and this is just a natural extension of neighbourhood policing.
On the rollout, we're coming to Woking, and if you come and find me afterwards, I'll probably be able to tell you roughly when.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Well, thank you very much.